Welcome to the Diablo podcast. We are online at diabloincgamers.com. This is your host, Flux. I am joined on this show by Neinball and Wolfpaq again. This is part 2, continuing from the show we posted on Monday. And in this one, kind of a bite-sized podcast for us. It's a lot of discussion about the Diablo 3 community and why there's often such a negative tone to things compared to all other games and anything, basically, in the entire world. And we also talk a little about what we're expecting to see in the remainder of Diablo 3 before Diablo 3 expansion, and what kind of patch stuff we'll get updated on. It's about a half-hour show, so listen and enjoy. Speaking of the community, remember the old days when everyone loved Jay Wilson and loved Bashiok's sense of humor, and then basically everything that people liked about what they said became hate once the game came out and there were problems in some ways?
Uh-huh.
Not everyone hated them, but
Right.
and both those people have now vanished from the earth. So can you guys recall the early days of, when we were all one big happy family and eager for the game, and we were actually following like Bashiok's Twitter feed and being excited by it, like in 09, 010, 011? No, you can't. It's
No,
too long
too
ago.
long.
I do remember I always enjoyed, Bashiok's. He always was a very blunt and sarcastic individual on the forums, and I always saw the humor in the things that he was saying, but of course everyone just tried to rip him apart and, made it seem as if he was just some egotistical asshole on the forums.
Well, he was very sarcastic, and people liked his sarcasm until there were anything that became angry. Like the famous one is the "Aren't you thankful" remark, which was made in June 2012, where he was saying sarcastically, "Aren't you glad we didn't nerf the game completely or something?" People chose to misinterpret it and take it literally and such.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bashiok encounter Wolfpaq, and was his mustache wonderful?
No, I don't.
Did it tickle?
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
You had no interest in those things.
No, I have trouble paying attention to, well, especially since, in the beginning of the game, especially, like now, finally, like, almost a year later, they're starting to post, extremely interesting things, that are very relevant to the game. Travis, and just yesterday, what was it, the game producer who came on and gave the details about the results of the gold hack and what's happening going forward. But back in the day when the game had first come out, the messages they would give on the forums just weren't that interesting to me. They just didn't seem that pertinent, so I didn't pay a lot of attention to the things they were saying, and I didn't care really if he was sarcastic or if Jay Wilson wanted to double something. Although, the memes sort of amuse me still to this day.
So Jay Wilson left the team in January 2013, but of course, a little before that was the big controversy where Dave Brevik made some comments about Diablo 3. He was asked questions about it. And ironically, one of the things he said, and Max Schaefer also said repeatedly, was that, it's much more fun to find items than to buy them, and we don't agree with the real money auction house. Or the gold auction house even. And of course, eventually Blizzard, Jay Wilson just recently, a couple months ago, said, yeah, we think the auction house was kind of a mistake. So it's funny that they've come around to all these, basically everything in D3 is slowly turning back into D2 in so many ways, But Jay Wilson did this whole thing, the F that loser controversy, which we discussed on the podcast months ago, and we don't need to go through all that again, but that was back in August, and became a big PR debacle. And one of the main things I'm wondering, you guys might have some insight on this, Neinball especially, since you play World of Pandacraft as well. Is the Diablo 3 community like especially poisonous and negative and prone to hate, or is it? It seems to me like World of Warcraft, you get lots of big arguments and for the Horde or whatever, and people QQ on the forums when there's a patch that nerfs druids or whatever. But it seems like it's more about my class versus other classes, or about the gameplay. It's not like we hate you and want you to die, you who are making this game. Do you see more of that in the Diablo 3 world than in the WoW and Starcraft communities?
Oh, I think the vitriol in the Diablo 3 community greatly outshines anything that I've ever seen in the WoW community to a large degree, where anyone attempting to discuss anything, not just on the Diablo official forums, but on a lot of other websites or like Diablo Reddit or whatever, you try to say something positive about the game and you're met with, this game sucks. Why are you even playing this? This game's horrible. A year later, people are still trolling threads of people that legitimately enjoy the game. It's just, I've never seen anything quite like that immense level of hatred, and just, I can't even come up with a word for it. Just like how much these people, just want to spread as much hatred and negativity about it as they possibly can.
I mean, they clearly care about the game because they're still on the forums and they're still, it's been out a year. There's been plenty of other games come out in that time, but they're still on the Diablo boards and, it's just, and I agree with Neinball. I don't play World of Warcraft now, but I played it for a long time and I never saw anything like this, even remotely similar. It's kind of interesting, but also, I mean, it's disappointing when you realize that just a lot of people out there just have no patience or really respect for the people who, I mean, you don't have to respect the people who made the game, but why would you stick around just to troll people who do and who do enjoy it? Like, I don't get it, but
Yeah.
that's the internet for you. It's
Blue representation on the forums themselves of how much, just pure hatred that, Bashiok on the forums, Ghostcrawler is probably far more sarcastic and blunt and straight to the point than Bashiok ever was.
And he's the lead dev on World of Warcraft.
Yeah, he's one of the lead developers or balance developers, but he never received the sheer level of hatred. I mean, he had his following of haters that would reply to everything that he ever did, but nowhere near the extent that happened on the Diablo forums.
And this happened, we talk about the pregame as being a big happy family and more community awareness and stuff, and probably it was somewhat. But you'll recall the minute Diablo 3 went on sale, the Metacritic rating was like .-7,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
It was like, and people were just waiting for anything to go wrong so they could hate on it.
I couldn't play the game for the first 2 hours, so this is absolute garbage, regardless of the fact that the servers were up and playable, by 10 a.m. when all the stores opened. Actually, for the people that didn't do the midnight release, but it's like that launch just was, it's absolutely horrible. This game is shit. I'm giving it a 1.
And you'll recall this was the biggest selling computer game of all time. So
Yeah.
It's not like there were like 1,000 copies sold and people were angry about it. I mean, it was the biggest selling computer game ever.
Or at least the fastest.
Yeah, 10 million copies in the first week or whatever it was, and
I think,
yet somehow the 10,000 people who absolutely hate it are the most heard of anyone. There's two related points on this that are amusing. One thing that's funny is whenever there's a new ARPG coming out, all these haters are suddenly the biggest fans.
Yes.
Like for a while it was like
Diablo
Torchlight.
killer.
Like Torchlight 2 was coming up, and it's like, oh, this is how Diablo 3 should have been. It's so awesome. And then for a while it was PoE.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, this game is so awesome. All you guys are assholes for playing Diablo 3. And now it's like Neverwinter or whatever else is coming up next. I remember Borderlands 2 was even getting some plugs for a while and stuff.
Yeah, and what's the new one that actually David Breverick is doing? The
Marvel Heroes
yeah,
something.
Yeah.
It's just like whatever new, in the same genre is coming out, you can guarantee you'll see people clogging up the Battle.net forums and fanside forums saying, this game is awesome, Diablo 3 is horrible, why are you playing it?
I'm sure that exists for World of Warcraft as well. Only people got tired of doing that after like 6 or 7 years. This next MMO is gonna kill WoW. You'll see. No, this next one definitely is gonna do it. I know I've said this 30 times over the past 6 years, but this MMO is going to be the one.
Well, eventually they'll be right. So you
yeah,
just keep making the same prediction long enough.
Unfortunately, the game that does that is going to be Titan, so they won't really have anything to say about it.
And the other thing that World of Warcraft and Starcraft, I mean, those aren't really the same game as Diablo, but obviously by the same developer, so there's a parallel, there's a commonality.
Mm.
When people get burnt out on those games, they just sort of stop playing them and do something else. They don't seem to spend all their time saying that if you still play it, you're a bad person and I deserve to hate you.
Right.
I mean, everybody quits playing WoW between expansions, and then everybody jumps back in the expansion. But you don't see the last 6 months of the Panda Pack. Everyone's like, "This game is the worst game ever. You're such a horrible person for playing it." They just still do something else.
There might be like 1 or 2 people that will troll the forums occasionally and say that, but nowhere near the extent of Diablo 3. And I don't think I've ever actually seen that in like the StarCraft community. There'll be like a semi-pro player that quits because I don't find the game fun anymore or anything like that, and I'm gonna go play League or Dota or whatever as opposed to StarCraft. But I don't hear anyone ever coming back, going through and saying, "Oh, how are you still playing this game?"
So is this all a testimony to Diablo 2's addictiveness and long-term lasting power or something? I mean, why is this so different with Diablo 3 and versus other franchises?
I think
obviously I'm the one who should be answering this question given my job description and
yes.
such, but I just don't know. I mean, it's weird, and I keep asking different people the same kind of question, trying to get more insight into it.
Well, I mean, Diablo 2, a lot of us played it for a really long time, and there were extremely high expectations for Diablo 3, and I think that's what it comes down to. It's like, I mean, StarCraft, I guess StarCraft's in a similar situation, but they uh, they really didn't change much fundamentally about the game of StarCraft between StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2, and they did with Diablo 3. And of course, the launch wasn't as smooth as it could have been, so that didn't help. But it's just, a lot of, I mean, there's also, it's the internet where people are not always the most, reasonable. But I just think that's what it comes down to, is that people have really, really high opinions of Diablo 2, sometimes too high. I don't want to set any
The
Diablo
the
fans out there. But
the rose tinted glasses looking back
right,
on it, but I think that is really the point, is that so many people had just had for so long. Diablo 2 was like that perfect game. You might not have
right,
played it for 4 years, but someone would ask you, what was the favorite game you ever played? And be like, oh, Diablo 2. You know,
right.
and you could go back in after not playing it for 4 years. You still remember most of what's going on, and you could just immediately get re-addicted. That happened to me all the time. I
Yeah.
wouldn't play
Oh,
it
me
for a
too.
year, and then I would, forget to go to work because I stayed up for 18 hours playing Diablo 2 again because I just one more level, one more level. Oh man, come on, just one
Yep.
more level. It's like I just one more bail run. I could do this. I'm just like
Yep.
3 bars away. It'll be like 3 hours, but just everyone, especially if you're just the community, that would be listening to this podcast or even just be visiting gamers, they absolutely loved, Diablo 2, and that was, like your baby, your child. And when Diablo 3 did take, a different direction and change some things up, people are going to be very, very upset because the new incarnation of the greatest game ever made doesn't fit their expectations. But I mean, it definitely is understandable if a lot of people that were, very disappointed when Diablo 3 came out, because a lot of people, really did want Diablo 2.5. And I mean, Diablo 2.5 would have been, a freaking fantastic game. It would have been awesome. No one listening to this podcast wouldn't want to have played Diablo 2.5, but, Blizzard wanted to make, a much larger step than that. They just didn't want to, put shinier graphics on an old model. They wanted to try and push the game a little bit further, test out some different system. Maybe back in a podcast we did in like October or November, one of the most surprising things, I think Flux, you asked us what was one of the most surprising things in Diablo 3 after having played it for like 6 or 7 months. And I, still to this day, like, if to answer that question, it would be like just how much support the dev team gives the game, and just how much that they do still show that they care. You might not think that they care and that they're continuing to fuck up the game, or that they're not making the right decision, or they're not doing enough, but they're still working on it. They're still trying to make the game better. They're still trying to make it perfect. So they could have just gone through and pushed an expansion and made some money off of all the changes that they've been making to the game up until this point, but instead they're going through and they're making it free, for at least everyone that's bought the game. They're
One other thing I would like to throw in there is that, I mean, two things that they announced are really, for some reason, people got really, really, really upset at the online only requirement and the real money auction house. And I mean, not for some reason, I understand the arguments against it, but so a lot of the haters just locked onto those two things and then dismissed everything else it did because of those two things. And you just simply hate it for that reason and that reason alone. And what can you do when
I
people are
I
like that?
can't play Diablo 3 when I'm on my 7-hour plane ride to BlizzCon, so this is absolutely unacceptable. Only that's a lie, because most airlines now you can't actually have an internet connection.
On this whole topic, we had a vote in late 2012. How many hours have you played of Diablo 3 this year? And looking at the results, 96% of people said that over 50 hours, 81% were over 200 hours, and then like 50% were over like 500 hours. I kind of wonder if this ties into the whole hate thing. And many people, as is often pointed out in reviews, lots of these new games come out for consoles especially, and it's 20 hours, 10 hours of playthrough.
Right.
And maybe you do, Call of Duty and you do death matches for 5 years or stuff. But quite a few games, you play it through once or twice and you're done. And it's a fun experience and you get 20 or 30 hours out of it. And people seem to get 1,000 hours out of a Diablo game and they're still bitching they haven't gotten enough fun.
Yep.
So how many hours is enough, and is there a level of fun per minute that's not living up to the total, or people just have very different expectations, it seems like, for this kind of game than for most games?
Yeah, I think people wanted it to be a perfect product. From the posts you read, people are like, "Oh, well, you've had 10 years since Diablo 2 came out," and like I always chuckle when I read
Look,
that because how
look,
is that
I
relevant at all to?
well, I actually think that in certain respects that's a valid point because Diablo 3 wasn't made to say compete with Diablo 2 Classic. It was made to compete with Diablo 3 after 10 years or Diablo 2 after 10 years of patches of content. That's kind of the level of expectation that you would make a sequel to have certain systems and functionality in place that would be, you know, comparative to your predecessor at this point in time. You're not making a game and trying to say, it's like, oh well, Diablo 2 didn't have it, when it first launched, but that's kind of regardless because what Diablo 2 is now. You're not trying to pander the argument of, well, Diablo 2 didn't have it at launch. It's like that's you have what Diablo 2 is now, and that is what you have to compare it to. That because the dev team was making Diablo 3 knowing what Diablo 2 was like. It's not like trying that they, I it'd be hard pressed to find someone that actually could only think of Diablo 2 in terms of how it was, at launch in Classic before Lord of Destruction. Now,
Right, right.
some people will of course take a much drastic, stance of that, and it had to be absolutely perfect in every respect compared to what Diablo 2 had, and have to have the pandemonium events and the rune words and all the other types of stuff. But I think that there is at least a valid argument in saying that Diablo 2 has this now. Why doesn't Diablo 3 have it?
For that can be said for some things, I think, in a very narrow application. But people, I don't. I've seen lots of posts that just sort of broadly say, they've had 10 years of experience on, like, the D3 team's completely different team, and this is a completely different game. It's not like they, obviously they drew on the name, but this isn't Call of Duty, which comes out with another game every 2 years. Like Diablo 2 was
2 years, you're being a little bit.
Yeah, every 14 months.
every
Yeah,
yeah,
I
maybe
think
I'm
every
Or
9 to
else Bobby
11.
eats their liver with some kidney beans and a nice Chianti.
right.
Chianti.
Yeah, but I think Diablo 3 is at least as different from Diablo 2 as Diablo 1 was from Diablo 2, and each one is, it's a different flavor, and it's, everyone has its pros and its cons, and I think that a lot of people just don't take those into account. Like, a lot of people expect it to be like a Call of Duty, where everything I had in the previous game I should have in this game, but that's just, that's not the case, and Blizzard was never, they never, well, okay, I can't say they didn't promise something and didn't deliver because they definitely did that. But they never made us think, oh, skill points, synergies are going to be in this game, because they've been very upfront about, no, this is a different game. We're not going to have all the same stuff we had in the previous game. Like, the attributes are different, skills are different, limited how many you can use at a time. So it's just, people got to understand it's a different game, and I think a lot of times people are measuring this as if it is Diablo 2.5, which, it's pretty clear it isn't.
Ironically, Blizzard North was making Diablo 2.5, as we've seen in those leaked screenshots. It looks like
Yeah.
really was just, and then so they rebooted everything and really changed everything around, and in some ways improved it, and in some ways, the game mechanics and functions that we've seen, like adding Paragon levels and stuff. People want to have something to grind for long term. It
Right,
turns out.
right.
So, any last thoughts on the community? Everyone's wrong and you're right, basically.
Yep.
I think that I'm right and everyone else is wrong is the mentality of the community.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So, what are you guys looking forward to in Diablo 3 coming up? Do you think we're going to get any more big patches and changes, or is it just going to be like people have kind of pointed out that you can't really do any huge item overhauls while you have the existing game because people have paid real money for so much stuff. So you kind of think it's going to have to be an expansion for like a whole new item system where everything gets devalued, all the current items get devalued and become irrelevant.
I don't think they need to devalue. So yes, if they were going to do a
Well,
complete
if everything comes out new and awesome, then that automatically devalues what you have now, right?
right, and I agree. But if they're going to do that, then they need to do an expansion. I don't think they need to do that to fix the item system, and I don't think we're going to have to wait for an expansion to see. Well, when I say fix, I mean to have items you can build a character around. I don't think we need an expansion for that, and I think there will be another major patch based on just what they were. We have examples of items they're working on at this very moment. But it might be wistful thinking on my part. I'm hoping it comes that we get to see those items before the Diablo expansion comes out because we know how long that might take.
Neinball, why is he wrong?
Um, I think if you wanted to like completely overhaul the item system and change, how it functions to say devalue base stat, average damage, crit, and crit damage, and put a little bit more emphasis on having other affixes and other abilities, so that way everything isn't just so much of a small incremental increase that well, this has 10 more dexterity, so I'm doing a little bit more damage and spending 50 million gold on it. If they really wanted to rework that and completely change it to where, say, your base attributes were based off of the item level, and so that's how the majority of your damage came in, and so that way it was more of a choice between, say, this item has crit damage, this item has crit chance, and this item has, like a bonus, 30 dexterity on it, as opposed to, trying to find one with, like 300 or 200 dexterity on it. That would definitely take like an expansion to just change that overall mentality of how you look at gear. But I think that they will definitely see, I think that they more or less have promised us, that we'll have another big patch before the expansion comes out where they go through and they rework the legendaries. They have the legendaries all scale up to level 63, and, you can find a Leoric Signet, a level 60 Leoric Signet in Inferno. So there are some things to go through and look forward to, and definitely, like as Wolfpaq was pointing out, there's nothing stopping them from adding in new items that kind of more geared towards changing the way that you play because they have different effects or abilities. But I think them getting away from main stat crit damage is what you look at every single piece of gear, and making other things a bit more viable, or some other form of damage increase or survivability piece.
Infernal Machine came in October 16th in V105. That was the last actual new content. I mean, you could certainly argue that the monster density is new content because it makes all of Act 1 and 2 playable now, which
Wait, there's
I
something
guess is...
besides Act 3?
Yeah, there is now. Not hasn't been for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that was October 16th. I mean, that's eight or 9 months ago when they last added a new content. So I would be surprised if they don't add some more content, a new bottomless dungeon or something like that. But well, they haven't made any indications of that yet. But obviously the itemization overhaul. But yeah, I agree with you guys. We're going to see some more changes before the expansion, and given Blizzard, we might not see expansion until like 2015 for all we know.
Right.
So
I hope
Yeah.
we
you
don't
know,
have to wait that long.
put it back in your pants.
Yeah.
It's going to get cold.
I'm hoping, it's like the WoW team and the StarCraft team so far have at least been able to do an expansion in 2 years. So I'm hoping the Diablo team would, be able to do something similar. And at BlizzCon, we should definitely hear more information about the expansion and get at least a tentative 2014 release date or what have you.
BlizzCon is 18 months after release, so I mean that's already an expansion pack is out for many games, and they
Right.
won't even be announcing it yet, as
Yeah.
far as we know.
Yep, that's a good point.
It's
But
out of this turned ugly again. We were all excited about new features, and then it's like, yeah, they're slow, they suck.
well,
You can tell it's a Diablo podcast. It always turns negative in the end.
yeah.
Always, you just can't get away from that. That is the community.
We've proved our own point for the last half hour of discussion.
Yes, we're consistent.
Okay, guys. Well, thanks for your time, and enjoyed year 1 of Diablo 3, and hopefully year 2 will be even better.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely looking
Boy.
forward to what the future holds. There's definitely, I mean, they can. I'm sure someone is going to make me regret saying this like 16 months from now, but the future can, it can only look brighter. They can only do better going forward.
Yeah, and then you're playing on Crash flying to BlizzCon. That'll be that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's pretty consistent about all the criticism I see is the gameplay is really, really awesome, but like that's almost always in there somewhere. Like no one denies the game is extremely fun to play. It's just making it compelling to play more. And yeah, I
Items
remain
and stuff are
optimistic.
always the complaint.
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
we completely missed something in this entire podcast. Diablo 3 is horrible because they made it for the consoles the entire time.
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
I was gonna mention that when you're talking about the
Yeah,
console
we
stuff.
didn't say anything about how the console screwed this game over. Dang it.
Well, there's console in the next podcast, or
Okay.
the previous podcast, or
Oh,
however the sequence of these things works.
phew.
All right.
That was a topic of discussion, but
All right.
okay. Final thoughts, guys. Nothing. You're
Nope.
good.
Good to go.
Well, you've been listening to the Diablo
Oh,
podcast.
sorry.
We are online at DiabloInkGamers.com. Moo.
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 Moo moo.
Moo.
Moo moo.
Moo. Moo. Moo. Moo.
Yeah, as I noted after yesterday's podcast, we're doing Diablo 2 cow level. There's no soundtrack to Whimsyshire, it's just there.
Yeah, it's what I don't even know what, sounds those things make.
They just sort of high pitched squeals, basically.
La 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 la.
Gary.